On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein was hospitalized due to chest pain. At that moment he wasn't aware, but the largest artery in his body, the abdominal aorta, had swollen and ruptured, causing internal bleeding known as an abdominal aortic aneurysm. At the time, he was busy preparing a speech he would deliver on television for the 7th anniversary of Israel. His doctors wanted to take him into surgery immediately, but Einstein, who had undergone surgery for the same reason 8 years earlier, must have realized that his time had come. He refused with these immortal words, "I will go when I want to go. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." And indeed, in the early hours of the next day at Princeton Hospital, he passed away. Those who have watched House MD will recognize the name of this hospital. In reality, it had nothing to do with Einstein's death, but the writers of the series most likely chose the name intentionally. But the truly interesting part happened during Einstein's autopsy. The pathologist, Thomas Harvey, just 7 hours after the death of the great genius, removed Einstein's brain without the family's permission, injected it with 10% formalin, and preserved it. His goal was to study this unique brain to discover what made him so intelligent. But Einstein hated being idolized. That's why he had requested his body be cremated and his ashes scattered in secret. In other words, Harvey completely violated Einstein's will. Moreover, he didn't only remove his brain, he also removed Einstein's eyes and gifted them to his ophthalmologist, Henry Abrams. When Harvey realized he might be in trouble, he managed to persuade Einstein's son, Hans Albert Einstein, about the importance of his act, and obtained retroactive permission. This saved him from legal consequences, but Hans had one strict condition: his father's brain could only be studied for scientific purposes, and the results had to be published in respected academic journals. Harvey promised this and said he would publish his findings within a year. Indeed, Einstein's brain has since been the subject of many studies. So, what did researchers find? Were there traces of genius within his brain? Let's take a look. One of the most common myths about Einstein is the claim that despite his intelligence, his school grades were bad. It's easy to see why people like to believe this. If even Einstein was treated as a poor student, then perhaps anyone could one day become a genius like him. But the truth is different. Einstein's grades were actually very good. For example, here's his report card from September 30, 1896, when he was in his final year of high school. At that time, in Switzerland, the highest grade was a 6 and the lowest was a 1. Looking closely, you'll see that Einstein received 6s in algebra, geometry, physics, and history, 5s in chemistry, natural history, and German language and literature, 4s in drawing and geography, and his lowest grade was a 3 in French language and literature. Not bad at all. In fact, Einstein's mother, Pauline Einstein, once wrote in a letter during his early school years, "Yesterday Albert received his report card. Again, he is the top of his class, and his marks are excellent." Student. Of course, like every student, he had conflicts with teachers. In middle school, one of his teachers even said, "It would be better if Einstein were not my student." But this wasn't because Einstein was lazy. Rather, he often smiled at things the teacher said, which was perceived as disrespect. At one point, the teacher even told him, "You will never amount to anything." But looking at a few anecdotes doesn't give the full picture. When you look at the general record, Einstein was clearly a strong student. So why do people keep spreading the myth that Einstein had bad grades? Well, one reason is the grading system. In Germany, where Einstein studied before moving to Switzerland, the grading scale was the opposite. 1 was the highest, and 6 was the lowest. So his early report cards were full of 1s, meaning top grades. But many mistakenly assumed they were failing marks. His Swiss school switched grading systems during his final year, reversing the scale so that 6 was now the best grade. All of this caused misunderstandings. In short, the truth is, Einstein's grades were always good, even excellent. So, what actually made Einstein so special? Could the secret lie in his brain? Thanks to Harvey's controversial decision to remove Einstein's brain, scientists were able to investigate this question. Harvey photographed the brain extensively and then cut it into 240 blocks, from which microscopic slides were prepared. These sections were chosen according to brain atlases that mapped areas responsible for different functions. But there was a big problem. Harvey himself wasn't a neuroscientist. He and his mentor were both pathologists, experienced with trauma and disease, but not with the detailed study of brain function. This is why Harvey failed to publish anything within the year he had promised. He simply didn't know what he was looking for. In fact, just days later, he was forced to resign from Princeton Hospital for violating medical ethics. Carrying Einstein's brain in 2 jars, Harvey drifted across America for decades, unable to persuade any serious scientist to study it. At one point, he even offered to give the brain to Einstein's granddaughter in California, but she refused. For years, the brain seemed almost cursed. Finally, after nearly 40 years, Harvey returned the brain samples to Princeton. It wasn't until 1999, 44 years after Einstein's death, that the first scientific paper on his brain was published. Since then, several studies have revealed some fascinating details. First, Einstein's brain was not unusually large. In fact, it was smaller than average. A man of his age and weight would typically have a brain of about 1,400 grams, but Einstein's was only 1,030 grams. But size isn't everything. In fact, researchers found unique structural differences. For example, in Einstein's frontal lobe, there was an extra ridge, an additional convolution, which is linked to abstract reasoning and mathematical thought. No surprise there. Another feature was the so-called omega sign in his motor cortex, a region associated with fine finger movements. This structure has been observed in people who started playing instruments like the violin at an early age. Indeed, Einstein began playing the violin at age 6 and played throughout his life. Other studies found that in certain areas, such as Brodmann Area 39, related to language processing, Einstein had fewer neurons than average. This aligns with the fact that Einstein had trouble speaking fluently until about age 6 and struggled with issues resembling dyslexia throughout his life. Interestingly, the most notable differences in his brain weren't in the areas for math or physics directly, but in those connected with sensory and motor functions. This matches what we know about Einstein's way of thinking. He wasn't someone who thought in words. He often described thinking in terms of images, colors, and even music. He was, in a sense, a synesthete. When stuck on a problem, he would sometimes play violin for hours, then suddenly stop and exclaim, "I've got it!" before translating the idea into mathematics. Another fascinating point, Einstein's approach to physics was heavily shaped by aesthetics. While most physicists built theories to match experimental results, Einstein asked, "If I were God, would I have created the universe this way?" His sense of beauty guided which theories he found acceptable. This helped him develop the theory of relativity, but it also held him back at times. For example, while working on general relativity, his aesthetic preferences led him down wrong paths for nearly 2 years before he finally surrendered to the mathematics. Later, his reliance on classical physics and resistance to quantum mechanics caused him to make many mistakes. But his unique way of seeing the universe, blending intuition, imagery, and beauty, imagery. So, was Einstein born with a unique brain, or did it develop this way because of his lifelong work? The truth is probably both. The brain is not static, it is plastic. Experiences reshape neural connections. But large-scale structural differences, like the unusual folds in Einstein's brain, are thought to be mostly innate, since brain anatomy is largely set by age 6. At that age, Einstein was not yet doing advanced physics, though he was already intensely curious. Most experts believe Einstein was born with some structural advantages, but his life circumstances, persistence, and relentless curiosity were equally essential. He didn't become a genius simply by sitting and waiting. He worked obsessively, followed his passions, and never gave up. In short, genius is never just about genetics, or brain anatomy, or hard work, or luck, or environment. It's about all of these, in different amounts, in different lives. Maybe you weren't born with a brain like Einstein's. Maybe your grades aren't like his. That can't be changed. But what you can change is how you use your own brain's plasticity and how you put yourself in positions to succeed. So next time you're learning something new or wrestling deeply with an idea, don't just think of it as gaining knowledge. Imagine the very connections inside your brain physically changing and growing stronger. That perspective will make learning even more rewarding. Try it. You'll see.